You know, when you first mentioned what you were, you suggested that maybe the people in Norman should replace governors with guardians of liberty. I want you to think about something. There's really only two kinds of government in their purest form. It's either going to be a government that is going to protect your private property and respect your liberty on the one hand, or it's going to be a government that is going to consume your private property and abuse your liberty on the other hand. That's really the only two kinds of government there are. We have a lot of names for different forms of government, but they're all just variations of those two polar opposites. And I have an opportunity, privilege to speak to a lot of young people, and I like to establish that in their minds as the two types of government. And then I ask them, what kind of government would you rather have? And most of the time they will say, well, I'd rather have a government that respects my liberty and protects my private property. And it's a philosophical understanding. And whether it's an issue or a candidate, I would urge you to use that standard to try to determine who would be the best. Now, there are proper functions of government for which we must pay taxes as we live together here. But one of the challenges of our founding fathers was to craft a government that allowed for the greatest amount of liberty and yet still delivered the necessary functions of government. And that's a challenge that we face today. And I'd say we've gone way overboard the wrong way. How many of you were a little bit disappointed with the outcome of the elections in November? Well, I want to tell you, I was really disappointed too. Not that I thought that Mitt Romney was somehow the savior of this nation. I did not think that at all.
Amen.
But as much as I have known about President Barack Obama, and I've studied a lot about him, and know that not only is he a Marxist, he is an anti-American from his anti-colonial perspective, and he is doing all that he can to dismantle the prosperity and the free enterprise system of the United States. I just was shocked that 50+% of the voting public would vote to put him back into office. And what I think that did was expose the changing demographics that we've seen for some time. As much as I was disappointed with the outcome of the presidential election, the fact that the Republicans lost a couple of seats in the Senate and we lost, 7 or 8 seats in the House, as much as I was disappointed in those things, the more important elections, in my opinion, was the legalization of homosexual marriage in three states, the legalization of marijuana. Now, the states can do that under our system, but what it really shows is the cultural shift in the mindset of the people of this nation. And we don't really have a politician problem, folks. The politicians that are out there are the result of what the people do who put them in those positions. They're a reflection of the people is what they really are. I want you to understand, if nothing else tonight, we are in a war. Amen. And I want you to see it as warfare. If you don't see it as warfare, then you're just playing with it. And I want to tell you, it is exceedingly sober. We're on the cusp of going beyond the tipping point of this nation. There is a recent book that's been written called The Harbinger. How many of you have read the book? Okay, several of you, and I'm glad to see that. Basically, The Harbinger shows the arrogance of the people of Israel as they would claim from time to time that we're going to do this, we're going to do that, in the strength of their own arm and their own flesh. Now, my message tonight primarily are to Christians. If you're a non-Christian and you've come to a place of the principles of our founding fathers outside of that spiritual perspective, then God bless you. I'm glad you've been able to somehow intellectually approach that. But our founding fathers were overwhelmingly Christian, and they designed and built this nation upon the principles of the Bible. They did not want this to be I believe, a Christian nation, but they wanted it to be a nation based upon biblical principles. That's based upon all my study of the Constitution and their writings and their thoughts. And so I would suggest to you that this war that we're in, at its heart and its soul, is actually a spiritual war. But it plays out culturally, plays out politically, and it plays out as far as patriotism is concerned. I don't mind calling people like Barack Obama or Ben Odom here in Norman. Many of you probably, how many of you know who Ben Odom is? Okay. Or any of the other number of Wallace Collins, any of these other number of people here in Norman. I don't mind calling them unpatriotic. And they bristle at that, and that's very offensive to them. What they are neo-patriots. That's what Barack Obama is a neo-patriot. His patriotism is a new form of patriotism. It's a patriotism to something different, something new. He's been hoping for something new and something different. The word patriotism means a willingness to stand for, fight for, and represent the ideals of your nation. And true patriotism today is a willingness to stand for the ideals of our founding fathers. That's what true patriotism is. I just heard a professor, a constitutional professor at Georgetown University, rag upon our Constitution, basically saying it was outdated and we're nothing more than prisoners of the ideas of a bunch of old men that have no effect upon modern culture. Now, I would suggest to all the students that sit under that man and the parents that maybe paid the tuition, you ought to ask for your money back. Because first off, he's totally ignorant to the brilliance of that document. Our founding fathers understood the sin nature of man, and what that document is really about is the sin nature of man, and what man and his desire and lust to control and consume your private property and destroy your liberty, that tyranny that pops up over and over and over again. And they understood that, so they tried to craft a document that would prevent that as much as possible. Yet one of our founding fathers said, you know, as good as we can do it, if the citizens go to sleep, I'm paraphrasing this, it still won't work. And so we find ourselves today not only in a dumbed-down society, but a society that has largely been indoctrinated by not only our educational system, but by our other institutions such as Hollywood or TV and anything else that can convey information. And so we find ourselves in a really difficult situation. We've seen a decline in Christianity. We see parts of our country that are lost and lost forever. I can tell you the Northeast, with the exception of New Hampshire, and probably it's gone now too, the Northeast is gone completely, permanently, forever to the ideals of our founding fathers. They're solidly progressive in large numbers there. They're anti-Christian for the most part. I don't know if the last time I was here I told you about when I was in New England and flew over the World Trade Center less than 24 hours before it was hit. Did I tell you about that? Well, I can't take the time to go into it other than to say, on the Friday evening, the World Trade Center was hit on Tuesday. We were in Amherst, Massachusetts. On Friday evening, our friends said, you got to go see Northampton, Massachusetts. Let me tell you, Boston was founded in 1629. Northampton was founded in 1659, just 30 years later. It's one of the oldest cities in America. And we went up there on a Friday night. We got out of our car, walked 4 blocks down the street, crossed over, 4 blocks back up. Halfway down the street, I stood in front of the church and I read every placard on that church. I went out in the street and I took a picture of a bus stop in front of the church with the church in the background. It was a beautiful old stone church that was built in 1875. So what does that make it today? 138 years old? But what you may not know, that's actually the 5th church building to set on that site. The first church building to ever set there, the 3rd pastor of that church arguably preached the most famous sermon ever preached in America, called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, Jonathan Edwards. Northampton was the heart and soul of the Great Awakenings. You know what it's famous for today? The lesbian capital of the world. Easily 50% of everyone on the sidewalks that night, and they were crowded that night because we were having candlelight vigils all over the United States on that Friday night. They were organized all over the United States. Easily 50% of everyone on the sidewalks that night were 2 women walking hand in hand or arm in arm. One of them may have had their heads shaven, may have had their hair colored orange or purple, full of tats and full of body piercings. And, you know, they got the freedom to do that. But I'm just telling you this. I'm just telling you this. That at one time, that was vibrant Christianity, and today it's anything but. That church itself has got an ultra-liberal pastor in it now. And on any given Sunday, I've been told by several people while I was back there that over 50% of the people standing behind the pulpits in those churches will be a lesbian woman on a Sunday morning in that community. That's what you call religion, but that is not biblical Christianity, folks. And so we see this problem with sections of our country that are gone. New England is gone. It's never coming back. It's going further away. The West Coast is probably gone. And some of the Great Lakes states are close to being gone. Illinois is gone, folks. Yeah. And now we have this situation with immigration come along. We've got to deal with immigration. We have somewhere between maybe 12 to 20 million illegal aliens in this nation. And we got a guy on radio here named Lee Matthews in the afternoon, and he's becoming an apologist for these people. I want to tell you something. If a pathway to citizenship is made for these people, you will never see another Republican president in the United States of America. You will probably never see another majority in the House or the Senate for Republicans. Why? Because for decades, the Hispanic population in this country has voted for the Republicans between 20 and 40%. George W. Bush garnered 40%. That's the most. When Ronald Reagan signed the amnesty bill back in the 80s, it actually dropped a couple of percentage points after he signed the amnesty bill. Got 28%. And I'm just telling you, it is foolish to think that Hispanic people have an understanding of the ideas of our founding fathers, as well as most immigrants do not have that understanding. as well as most Americans coming out of the government schools. I heard on radio today a guy called in from Wyoming. He's a contractor. And he said, I forget who it was, Rush or Sean, I don't remember, but he said, I sat down with my employees, my Hispanic employees, and we studied the Constitution, and I turned them from voting for Barack to voting for Mitt. And I applaud him for that. But how many people will do that? That's something that really needs to be done. Point one, I want you to understand, we're in a war, folks. Treat it as a war. Think in terms of warfare. It's absolute necessity. Otherwise, we're playing with it. We're too far down the line to play with it. Point two I want to make is education. Any shape, form, or fashion, if you're a Christian, you need to make every effort you can to get your kids out of the government schools. Amen. Every effort you can. And you know, I've been an education researcher for almost 30 years now. And the one thought that I've heard time and time again that bores me to death now is, well, our school is really good because my kid's teacher is a Christian. Or my superintendent is a Christian, or the principal is a Christian. We just showed over a 2-week period of time the DVD called Indoctrination. And this was an Englishman that has moved to this country, and he and his wife bought a yellow school bus, and they traveled all over the nation doing research on education. And he interviewed Christian teacher after Christian teacher. And testimony after testimony was given. You know, I can't do any good. I can't do any good. My hands are tied. I can't do any good. Some of them were fired because they tried to do something. Some of them realized they could do no good, and they finally resigned and they left. But you need to understand, our schools have been very effective. If your perspective is, I want to change America. One of the most important books you could ever read on education is called NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education by Sam Blumenfeld. Mr. Blumenfeld read every publication and every speech delivered by the NEA from about 1917 to 1985 when he wrote the book. And from their own words and their own speeches and their own writings, he pulled forth what the government schools are actually about. Let me give you a quote from Mary Hartwood Futrell, who was the president of the NEA at that time. She said, "Education is on the back burner to us. We are walking the halls of Congress to reshape America." They all have local affiliates. In Oklahoma, the local affiliate of the NEA is the OEA. Do you know what they have done for years? They have walked the halls of the state capitol to reshape America. And they've been exceedingly successful. Former Congressman Tom Tancredo was in Oklahoma City about 8 or 9 years ago. And he was actually speaking at a banquet that I was attending. And before he'd been in Congress, he'd been an educator in Denver. He represented the south part of Denver. And he said, I go home all the time and I do these rallies in the schools. And he said, one day I was in a rally and I asked everyone, how many of you, all the kids, how many of you think you live in the greatest nation in the world? And he said only about 10 to 15% of the kids raised their hands. And it shocked him. He said, well, how many of you think you attend the greatest high school in Denver? And about 90% of the kids raised their hand. How many of you think you have the coolest mascot of any high school in Denver? About 90% raised their hand. And that puzzled him. And so he began to ask the same series of questions to every school that he went to. And he got the same results. Only 10 to 15% thought they lived in the greatest nation in the world. Why is that the case? There was a group out of Minnesota. Michelle Bachman was one of those people. Several others, I can't think of all their names right now. But one of them I've gotten to know a little bit. And in fact, he was a speaker at Reclaiming America for Christ this past summer. And he has a 2-hour DVD called America's Censored Heritage. And what he does is he goes into many of the textbooks that are in our school. And he shows that these textbooks are elevating people like Mao Zedong and Che Guevara and Stalin, elevating them to a place of equality with people like George Washington, Samuel Adams, Franklin, and others. If not equality, maybe superiority. And so our founding fathers are being belittled, while the Marxists and the Communists and others are being elevated in the minds of our children. And it's little wonder if you sit through that for 12 years, if you survive, and then you go to college. And some of those wild-eyed left-wing liberal professors relish the opportunity to spot and identify some little Christian that's been raised up on a Sunday school level of understanding and see just how quickly he can destroy that understanding or that faith in their hearts. We're losing our kids. And one of the things we're going to have to do, again, if you're a Christian, I cannot tell you how imperative. I don't care what you have to rearrange in your life. Get your kids out of the government schools. Whether you homeschool them or private school them, that's up to you. And I want to tell you, a lot of private schools aren't that good. A lot of private schools are a little more than a government school that does prayer and maybe has I'm trying to think what to call, not a Bible study, but a
semblance of a Christian curriculum.
Yeah, a chapel service once or twice a week or once a day for 15 minutes. If your school is not teaching the real ideals of our founding fathers, the principles of good government, solid principles of economics, then you're spending a lot of extra money to have your kid in a school that's going to be undereducated. In our schools, our kids are oftentimes having their spiritual life, their morality, and their academic life basically neutered, watered down, and destroyed. So it's up to you guys what you do there, but I'm just telling you, I've done this for a long time. How many of you know what the Hegelian dialectic is? It's also sometimes called the communist two-step. Take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. When you step back, it looks like you're moving away from your objective. You've given up on it. But all you're doing is preparing for your next 2 steps forward. Another way I like to say it is, if I wanted to drive a nail in this, and I took a nail and I hit it with a hammer and I had it halfway in there, if I leave the head of my hammer on the top of that nail and try to push it down all the way in there, I don't have the strength to do it. So what do I have to do? I have to move away from my objective to regain the energy to come back and hit it again. And so I learned, in fact, what got me to the place of activism, and Bobby Cleveland just walked in. Good to see you tonight, Bobby. New representative for maybe this area, I don't know. But what got me started in these type of activities, being politically active and always, I started listening to a program called Point of View almost 30 years ago. And I heard a man named Bill Bowen on the program and found out he was going to be in Oklahoma City the next night. And Bill Bowen had just retired from a 30-year career. He ended as being the superintendent of the social studies department of the Baltimore, Maryland School District. And when he retired, he realized that he had been a part of the destruction of America. So he and his wife, Penny, had formed a little ministry, and they were traveling throughout the United States, speaking in any church, any place they could, to try to alert people as to what was going on in the schools. So we went to see him the next night at a Baptist church south of Oklahoma City somewhere. We went to see him, and he stood behind a lectern about like this, and a nice young man in a white shirt, probably a private school student, sat in a chair, and there was a stack of books about this high. And the sole job of this young man was to take the next book off the top of that stack and hand to Bill while he read a quote out of it. And Bill would hand him the book he just quoted, and he built the new stack. He went through that whole stack in 45 minutes. All of the books he was quoting from were from the advocates of hope and change. The advocates of turning America into a socialist country. The advocates of globalism. And they were all educators, and they all intended to use the schools. And that night, it was like I had a nice little spanking from God, because prior to that, I'd been pretty effective as a pastoral elder at convincing people they should not get involved, Christians, they should not get involved in politics or government. They should spend all their time building the kingdom of God and let these kingdoms of the world go where they're going to go anyway. But God opened my eyes that night, and He showed me that the political arena and government are simply different realms of spiritual warfare than what I had understanding of. And I've been repenting for 30 years now from my misunderstanding. The next thing I want to urge people to understand is, in this culture that we're in, you have got to become what I would call a patriotic or a political evangelist. Now, if we were to ask the pastor back here, what percentage of the people in your church are pretty competent at sharing the gospel with other people? Probably wouldn't be more than 10 or 15%, but Pastor, you correct me if I'm wrong. And he's kind of shaking his head, yes. Almost everybody may be capable of maybe sharing a little bit of why they're a Christian. But to really be able to take God's Word and show people kind of truth that will change their life, and are aggressive in wanting to do that with other people, there aren't too many. And folks, it's kind of the same way in the political arena. A lot of us are just voters, maybe casual voters. Maybe we don't really even pay a lot of attention to it, but we are somehow guilted into thinking it's responsible to go vote. I need to go vote. I watched the news the other night, and they told me, get out and go vote. It's your civic duty. So I get there and I look at all these names, and oh gosh, I saw a lot more signs for this one. So that's where I'll vote. Do you think that might be why we're where we are today? I'd say it has a lot to do with it. My wife and I used to eat at the Hideaway in Edmond a lot. And we had a favorite waitress there. And I saw her at UCO when Dr. Coburn had just been elected to the Senate. One of her professors offered extra credit to go to this meeting. I saw her there and I thought, well, maybe she's interested in politics. And then I found out she was just interested in extra credit. But on a subsequent time there, she walked up to us smiling so proud and said, I registered as a Republican today. And I said, well, that's great. What made you decide to register as a Republican? Honest to God, folks, I'm going to get ready to tell you it's true. She said, I've always thought elephants were a lot cuter than donkeys. And that was the response of my wife and I. We laughed. And then all of a sudden we realized she was dead serious. You see, there are maybe 25% of the voters that I would call conservative base that have some pretty good understanding of government and what's needed. And there's about 25, maybe 30% on the opposite side. And those two sides cancel each other out in elections. So now we're moving to the middle, let's say 40%. And maybe 10 or 15% on kind of lean one side or the other, but they could be convinced with slick enough ads and enough manipulation. But you get down to the middle mush, maybe that 5 to 8% right in the middle. And I'm going to tell you, they don't have a clue who they're going to vote for a lot of times until they get in the voting booth. And in close elections, you know who decides the outcome of those elections? Those people there. Do you understand why much of the political ads that we see and the stuff we have mailed to our houses are so non-committal, so pink puff and piffle, if you will allow me to say that? It's because it's who that information is appealing to. I would suggest to you, sit down, come up with a list of people you know, and start working on those people. Start urging them to come to meetings like this, build this organization. Come to meetings like this. Start reading. And if you aren't one of those 15% that's really good at communicating things, then buy materials and give to them. I didn't have time. I got here late tonight, folks. The last 2 times I've been here, I've come from Brazil, and that's a piece of cake. Tonight I came from Guthrie. Oh my God, coming down I-35. And but I can tell you there is a tremendous amount of very good sources to begin to educate people. Some are very inexpensive, and some do a very good job. DVDs, short little books, and things like that. Load up on these things. Develop that list. Work with people. And if you don't make some progress with some people, after some period of time, I don't know when that is, take them off your list and put some new ones on. But you're going to have to become a political evangelist. You're going to have to become a patriotic evangelist. Things are different in Oklahoma than they are the rest of the nation. My wife and I, the first week of December, were privileged to host in our home for a week a representative of the Republic of Georgia. And there were 5 of these Georgians that came to the United States under a State Department program started by Jimmy Carter. And there were several different states that Georgians were coming to at the same time. They all went to Washington, D.C. for 2 days first, and then the State Department sent them out to states. And how they picked Oklahoma, well, what a mistake that was. And when we picked up our delegate at the airport that night, and one translator came and one facilitator came, and fortunately our delegate spoke pretty good English. I asked her, I said, Lika, are you coming here primarily to learn as much about government as you can? Or would you prefer just to experience Oklahoma and the United States and have as much fun and experience the culture as much as possible? And she said, oh no, I want to learn as much about government as I can. And their whole week was planned out during the day. And I said, well that's good. Now, let me share something with you. What you're going to learn all week is primarily how we do things now. And while things are going pretty good in Oklahoma, I want you to understand, Lika, America is in decline. It is in serious decline because of the way we do things now. So while you're here, I'm going to share some different ideas with you. And there were so many opportunities through that week for me to present the different ideological perspective than the way we do things now. Hopefully, she'll take that back. I was able to get all of them to our OCPAC meeting. I had one state senator and one state rep speak to them. They were interested in, that was their day for county government and openness and transparency in government. And so I had 2 of our elected officials speak to them, and then afterwards we got up And I presented them with my basic Patriot packet, and that was a fairly short but the definitive article on the difference between a republic and a democracy. The book The Law by Frederick Bastiat. Bastiat was a French economist and statesman. He wrote this book in 1848. And it is now the classic blueprint for a just society. What this book will do is show you where do we draw that line to understand what are the proper functions of government for which we must pay taxes versus those that are improper. And he shows that when government gets out of its proper realm, it participates in what he calls legalized plunder or thievery. In other words, government makes legal what is morally wrong. And then the little short book about Davy Crockett when he was a congressman called Not Yours to Give. And while a congressman, Crockett violated the principles of the book The Law. And he got home for re-election and one of his constituents called his hand on it. And when it was pointed out to him what he had done, he realized he had done wrong. And he truly repented, and he went back to Washington as a leader for good. And then 2 DVDs. One called Overview of America, and in 29 minutes that DVD will clearly define different types of government, different types of economic systems, what works, what doesn't work, and the importance for morality for liberty. You cannot have liberty without morality. You're fooling yourself if you think you can. And then the other one is called Dollars and Cents. It's the best thing I've seen to show what really is the most root fundamental problem causing the economic turmoil and the situation and the risk to our future from an economic perspective. Had all that in a little plastic bag. My wife was handing them out while I had to find those things. And I told them, I said, you know, you've got about 6, maybe 7 hours of reading and viewing to get through all of this. And I would charge all of you, if you will take the time to get through this, you will know more about good government and the ideas of our founding fathers and what made this nation great than 90 to 95% of all Americans. Isn't that a sad thing? The next thing, folks, you're going to have to learn to think strategically. Do you understand that every generation must fight for liberty? Every generation must fight for good government. The other side never goes away. They have setbacks and then they keep coming. Why? Because again, the root of all of this is spiritual. Anything that God has established as good and the right way to do something, God's enemy, Satan, and the powers of darkness will come up with an alternative, an opposite, or counterfeit plan. Now, I would to God, everyone in here was as active as I am, and I don't wish it on any of you. And maybe some of you are as active as I am. I don't know. But I'm telling you, you need to make sure a part of your life goes to good citizenship. There are things I do in life that I really enjoy, folks. I love to travel. I love to work on my little farm. And I don't get to do either one of those as much as I would like. But I do as much of it as I can. But you cannot withdraw from this fight. You have got to push and you've got to fight. Think strategically. You've got to live a balanced life, but you've got to give some of your time to citizenship. Some of your resources to citizenship. You need to develop. You need to determine where do you want to be? What do you want to accomplish? Maybe it's improving city government here. Maybe it's affecting the outcome of state government. Maybe it's influencing your local U.S. representative and your U.S. senators. But you need to start thinking, how do I get from A to B to do that? Plan out a strategy to do that. In one of my recent emails, I suggested just from a strategic standpoint, and I think we only have 3 election cycles to see whether America's gone too far or not. But one of the things I suggested is that conservatives who live on the West Coast and conservatives who live in New England as long as they do not live in a district that's held by a Republican, they need to seriously think about relocating. Where do they need to relocate to? They need to relocate to the battleground states. They need to relocate to places like Virginia, Ohio, Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, maybe Indiana. I mean, folks, if you're going to vote for Mitt Romney and then vote for a Democrat in Indiana and Missouri and South Dakota, I'm sorry, you're bipolar in your voting patterns. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. You're voting for the man. You're voting for people. You're voting for personalities. You're not voting for an ideology. I also suggested that people live in the Great Lakes states, such as Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin. They need to be moving to Iowa and Ohio and Indiana. And on the West Coast, you know, we probably have actually 2-3 million pretty solid conservatives in California. Do you know, as far as President, U.S. Senate, they are spitting in the wind. Their votes are completely worthless. And if they live in Democrat U.S. representative seats, they're really spitting in the wind. But if they were to relocate to Nevada, Colorado, and New Mexico, it wouldn't be too long before, for at least a while, we would have a lock on the Electoral College. And in fact, the states that I wrote about, it would put 56 Republican senators in office. And it would be a lock. How many of you think there's any chance that Oklahoma and the rest of any of our lifetime will ever vote for a Democrat for president? Okay, got one that thinks it might happen. I would suggest to you there'd have to be some awfully big changes before that would happen, partly in our election laws, to allow for third party or independent. Well, actually, independents can get on the ballot now. It's not easy. Third party can get on the ballot now, but it's sure not easy. But I would suggest to you there's about as much chance of a Democrat winning in Oklahoma as there is a Republican winning in Massachusetts, New York, and places like that. So these people are completely wasting their political votes. The fifth thing I want to talk about is the importance of using our economic strength, making choices with that. I love the concept of boycotts. You know why? Because that's the market making decisions. That's not going to government to make a decision. I would suggest, and I'm not talking about necessarily organizing boycotts, but I'd suggest maybe just start to do this on your own here. Start patronizing businesses that promote conservatism, that are patriotic. And stop patronizing businesses. And this is not 100% hard, but where possible, those owners are promoting liberalism. And start using your economic strength to do that. I'll give you an example. In Ohio, 1 out of every 5 jobs in Ohio is related to the auto industry. And all the what I'm trying to say, the research or evidence to determine why Ohio went for Obama this time is the auto industry people felt like that he'd done something great by saving GM. Now, of course, we used to call that General Motors. I'm sorry, to me it's Government Motors now.
Yeah.
And it would have existed had it been allowed to go through a normal bankruptcy. It would have continued to exist, but there would have been a renegotiation of the union contracts. And that's why Obama took it over, as opposed to allowing it to go through a normal bankruptcy proceeding. Chapter 11, not Chapter 7. And something happened that you may not know, and I don't know of it ever happening before, but the secured creditors, in other words, those people who owned company bonds, who had loaned money to GM, they were moved back in the line, and the union people were put in front. And I want you to know, in that kind of environment, if you have some money you want to invest somewhere, I hope it's not a union place, because it could happen to you there. Those people lost all of their money. And they were secured creditors. I don't know of it ever happening before. Personally, I will not buy a new automobile from the big three. Why? Because the agenda of America's organized labor has done more to harm this nation, in my opinion, than the Japanese or the Germans were ever capable of doing. I try to buy cars that are assembled and made in America. I just bought a brand new Altima, and it's made in Smyrna, Tennessee by non-union employees who are paid quite well. You do what you want, but I'm telling you, folks, we are in a war, and you need to treat it as a war. Another thing, we've worked really hard in this state for several years now to recapture some of our Second Amendment rights. And this last year, we finally got open carry passed. Now, we didn't get constitutional carry, but we got open carry passed. So now, if you go through the training and you get licensed by the government to be able to carry a firearm now, it's just a license to carry. It can be concealed or open. So what happened shortly after that, it went into effect in November 1st. I began to see signs popping up on all kinds of businesses, no firearms allowed. Early November, my wife and I headed to Branson, and we decided we'd stop and Stroud. It was about lunch. We like to eat at the Rock Cafe. Famous cafe, good food. Walked up to the door, and there was a brand new, freshly hand-printed sign, "No weapons allowed in here." And we were kind of in a hurry, and I said, "Honey, we can't eat here." And so we went to the barbecue restaurant and ate there. And I intended to send an email to the owner. And as soon as I got back, I saw a news item that she has the place up for sale, so I haven't done that. But I was in Purcell last month servicing one of my customers down there. It was an antique store, and there was a "No weapons allowed" sign. And so I walked in and I asked her, I said, "Why would you put a sign?" She was a very nice lady, an older lady. I said, "Why would you put a sign like that on your door and run the risk of losing customers?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, some people are very passionate about this, and they see that sign there, they won't even bother to come in this business." "Really?" I said, "Besides that, if someone wanted to come in here and rob you or harm you, would that sign stop them?" "Oh, no." You know what? When I went back down there this month, the sign was gone. I went to one of my customers this week in Edmond, and there was a sign on the door. I do business with this customer. And I walked in and I said, "What made you decide to put the sign up on your door?" And she said, "My crazy brother, who's a partner, and my crazier soon-to-be ex-husband." I said, "Well, let me ask you this. If that crazy ex-husband of yours decided he wanted to come in here and harm you, would that sign stop him?" I said, "No." I said, "Do you realize how many really good, solid, conservative, patriotic Oklahomans have worked to be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights, if they see this sign, they may choose to stop shopping with you. And I tell you, I'm sorry, I can't speak for what Clark Curry will do. I knew Clark did a lot of business there. And we do $200 or $300 a year there, we at OCPAC. But I said, I won't be able to have you do any more around printing here with that sign there. She said, really? I said, no, I can't do that. I said, we passionately work for this, and I just can't, if that's what you're going, if that's, you know, you want to display that, I had to find someplace else. And she said, do you have a razor blade? And I said, I'll take it off for you. So I went out and I took it off. And then I found out her largest customer is an organization that trains law enforcement officers. She got really worried. I went into Jimmy's Egg Sunday in Edmond for lunch with my dear dad, who will soon be 88 years old. And what did I see? No firearm. Went ahead and had lunch. The manager wasn't there. But now, I've got to contact Jimmy's Egg and tell him I'm sorry. But, you know, I just can't do business with you anymore. And I'll put it out in the email, and I'll urge people to do that. How many of you have AAA insurance? You know AAA has put that up on all of their doors now? You know who fought concealed carry more than any entity in the state of Oklahoma? AAA. Do what you want, but folks, I'm telling you, we're in a war. And a war is made up of many tiny little battles. Yes, sir.
I was saying, in our store, we hand out concealed carry little business cards that say if we're not going to patron your business anymore until you remove your concealed carry sign. That's one of the things we do as a service. We hand them out for free. Anybody wants to carry it.
Well, I'm going to soon have a speaker at OCPAC. And he has a surveillance alarm company and surveillance company in Edmond, and he actually has signs that has a picture of a gun with a heart that says "We love legal carry customers." And this, do you see what I'm trying to say here? Start using your economic power. Go ahead, sir.
Charlie, I'd just like to mention, for those people who may not be aware in terms of boycotting, Home Depot corporate office is very strongly pro-gay.
Yeah, I have it on my list here.
Again, if you have a choice, don't shop at Home Depot.
Yeah, I shop at Love's.
Yeah, I do too.
I shop at Love's. I will not go to Home Depot because their management actually allows their employees to march in gay pride parades with Home Depot uniforms on. And they are a huge funder of the homosexual movement. Now, folks, I will tell you, the Christian community is very slowly winning the abortion issue and very slowly making grounds on the creation issue. But they are losing the homosexual issue so fast it's not even funny. And your children have really bought into the homosexual agenda. We have finished last November with 7 election cycles. That's 12 years that we've interviewed candidates in the state of Oklahoma. We've interviewed over 200 of them. Our first election cycle, we interviewed a House candidate by the name of Coach Doug Whalen from the Capitol Hill area. And during that interview, he said, "You don't understand something." He said, these kids today think it's cool to experiment with homosexuality. He said, "Do you realize how far we've denigrated in the last 20 years?" He said, "If we continue over the next 20 years, where are we going to be?" I tell you where we are. Legalize homosexual marriage and such as that. People say, it makes no matter. How many of you have heard of Scott Lively? Dr. Scott Lively. He will be speaking at the High Noon Club on the 1st of March. He'll be speaking at our church on the 3rd, that night, Sunday night, and I hope to find a church for him that Sunday morning. Dr. Lively is the co-author of the book, The Pink Swastika. And he and a Jewish historian are working now on their 5th edition to this. And all the information in their book has been out there for a long time. But nobody had worked together at all and put it together in one place. But one of the things that he did, that they've done with this book, is they have blown the lid on the concept that the Nazis killed all the homosexuals in Germany. Prior to World War II, there were two groups of homosexuals. They called themselves the Femmes and the Butches. And every time the Butches tried to run for office, the Femmes would out them and defeat them. And the Butches got to where they hated them. The Nazi Party was rife with Butches. Adolf Hitler himself was a male prostitute at age 18. And when they gained control, finally, they killed the Femmes. That's how much they hated them. But folks, you cannot imagine how much of the moral denigration of this society has been urged on by the Marxists and the Communists. In fact, one of their strategies to destroy America was called internal demoralization. That's not demoralizing you like after the election, that you were down after the election because of the outcome. We're not talking about being down. We're talking about destroying the moral fabric of this nation. That's why they moved so quickly to influence Hollywood and to put card-carrying communists in key positions in Hollywood, all to destroy the moral fabric of our country. And it's been shredded to a great deal. There was probably the first Christian civil liberties legal organization out there was called the Rutherford Institute. John Whitehead was the founder of it. He wrote a book, which I'm having a hard time remembering the title of it. But part of it was the strategy of the communists to destroy America, and it was called the capturing of the robes. What are the robes? Of course, a robe is anything that you wore with to represent authority. Well, the robes were the judiciary, academia, and the pulpits. I was going to bring a little article about a meeting here in Norman in the next 2 or 3 days by a number of churches, sponsored by a number of churches. How many of you heard of the Oklahoma Sponsoring Committee? Any of you hear of that? Well, that was a group, there was a group of Saul Alinsky-ites that came out of Chicago about 7 years ago, and they started the Oklahoma Sponsoring Committee down here, and their goal was to have 40 churches as members within like a 3-year period of time. Of the 12 Catholic dioceses or churches here, 11 of them, actually all 12 of them, had joined this. And then the Unitarians, the usual suspects, the United Church of Christ, and actually First Nazarene of Oklahoma City. They all joined, and then while Mark, what was the radio host, Mark? Shannon was still alive. Some conservative Catholics came to him, and he began to do some programs on this. And some of these folks band together, and they've rooted this group out of 9 of those Catholic churches now. And First Nazarene rooted that group out of their church. And you know what they've done? They changed their name now, and they're back active at it again. Again, it's the counterfeit, and that's why it's so important, if you're a Christian, to have a good, strong, working understanding and knowledge of God's Word. The final thing that I think we've got to do going forward is to embrace states' rights. We've got to understand it. We've got to promote the concept of states' rights. You have a new resident of Norman. How many of you know Mark Kreslin yet? How many of you have met him? You need to have him here as a speaker ASAP. moved here from Maryland in August. He was a senior policy analyst for 2 different congressmen. And while in that position, he now hangs his head in shame over his participation in that. And he will just flat tell you there is very little chance of solving anything in Washington, D.C. Very little chance of that ever happening. And so he has moved here, and he is in process of creating a new organization called Redefining Government. What's he redefining it to? The ideas of our founding fathers, the things that work. See, the Constitution was about human nature. That's why it's as relevant today as it was the day that they crafted it. No matter how technologically advanced your society is, that Constitution is just as relevant today as it was then. The states have got to wean themselves off of the federal dollar absolutely as much as possible. I was so thrilled to see that our new Speaker of the House, T.W. Shannon, has created a States' Rights Committee in the House. Already Scott Pruitt, our Attorney General, as soon as he took office, virtually, he set up a department in his AG office and hired the best constitutional scholar he could find to examine every federal mandate and law that comes down upon Oklahoma to determine whether or not that mandate, that law, that edict is within the 17 enumerated powers found in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. And if it's not there, he's going to fight it. And I'm so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful that the States' Rights Committee was created. I was disheartened when I saw some of the names that were on the committee. There are 13 people, a good chairman, and 4 other good conservative lawmakers. 4 of the most liberal Democrats in the state legislature, and 3 moderate to liberal Republicans. And so what might come out of it, I don't know, but thank God we have a strong chairman there, because those 3 moderates may find it a little rough going to stand up against a bill the chairman wants through that committee. But that committee, I think, is going to find every means possible to try to push back against the federal government. See, not only do we have the right to, we as a sovereign state of Oklahoma have the responsibility to help put the federal government back into its proper limitations and to its bounds. The day after the election, which I believe was November 6th, the day after the election, November 7th, Wednesday, we had our meeting, and for the 4th time in a row, we had the Senate President Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House come to our meeting and speak to us. And we have asked them, when I invite them, I ask them to come and give us a little rundown on some of the newly elected members of their caucus and what they hope to accomplish and things like that. But this year we did something different. Our members had worked for 2 weeks and prepared an agenda from the grassroots of which we handed to them. And one of the things that we did is we urged them to push back on the federal government every way that they could. During the Q&A session, mind you, with the election the day before, and Obama wins, what did our Senate President Pro Tem say? Well, we're going to have to develop now a health care insurance exchange because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. Our group about went through the ceiling when he said that. I had to call him down. I had to call him down twice. This wasn't about get you. This was about trying to influence you. And as soon as I got him calmed down, then I turned to them and I said, Senator, what we're trying to get people to understand, I guarantee you've never heard this before, is the supremacy clause only applies to the 17 enumerated powers. It does not apply to those things outside of those. And so we handed this to them, and we urged them to push back. And another thing that we've got to kill here is people think, well, we've got to try to get as many of our federal dollars back as possible. If not, they'll go to another state. Can I tell you something, folks? Can I tell you something? Almost all the money that the people and the businesses of the state of Oklahoma send to Washington, D.C., almost all the money that we send there comes back in 4 different areas. Comes back in Social Security, Medicare, highways, roads and bridges, and military spending. Virtually all additional dollars coming into Oklahoma are deficit spending, newly borrowed or newly printed money. If we lose that money, so be it. It's not our tax dollars we're sending there in the first place. I can tell you this, that one of the things that the States' Rights Committee is pushing, and it's the chairman's bill, is to impound at least all the federal excise taxes, maybe all of the taxes that we as individuals or businesses pay to Washington, pay them to the state first, and then the state will forward them.
Excellent.
What's the purpose of that? If the federal government says, if you don't lower your speed limit to 55 or 50 or 45 or whatever some bureaucrat there thinks is the proper limit, if you don't do that, we won't send you your highway funds back.
Right.
Well, if you don't send the money there first for them to take their cut and send it back, you have what's called leverage. Now, folks, is that a little strange? Is that a little odd? Maybe. But can I tell you, we're in a war. We can't think about things the way we thought about them in the past. We've got to start figuring out how we're going to help Washington get back into its cage. Another concept is called nullification. And there's probably close to 50 bills out there this year that deal in one way or another with nullification. A great example of nullification is what's going on right now with Hobby Lobby. Only they're going through the courts to try to get permission. What if Oklahoma just passed a bill that said any federal agent that steps in the state of Oklahoma to try to penalize or collect money on Obamacare will be subject to being arrested and convicted as a felon?
Awesome.
Is that strong? It's pretty strong. Folks, I'm telling you, we're starting to move towards some uncharted ground. We're starting to move towards some areas that, at least in our lifetimes, we haven't been there before. Another thing I want to do, and in my email I said, you know, this meeting tonight is not going to be for the faint of heart, or people who want to play with politics or nibble around the edges. I'm coming here tonight to tell you what I think we've got to do going forward. And what I'm getting ready to say is something that's very strong here. And I want you to understand, I am not promoting secession. But I do think we need to have a discussion about it. Amen. And here's why I think we need to have a discussion. If we actually do that discussion, and it's done intellectually, through intellectual honesty, and what we'll start talking about is, well, my goodness, look how intertwined with the federal government we actually are. My goodness, look how dependent upon the federal government we happen to be. If we were to secede, either voluntarily or through resistance, If we were to do something like that, how would you do that? What would you do with people that have Social Security coming to them and Medicare? Well, folks, if you're on Social Security, and by the way, I'll get my first check in April. If you're on Social Security and you move to Mexico, you get your checks. Or you move to New Zealand or someplace, you still get your check, no matter where you live. What do we do with our military bases? Folks, we have military bases all over the world. How does commerce, how would commerce go between states that seceded and states that remained with the Union? Well, we trade with other nations all the time now. I'm not promoting this at this time, but I think we need to have a discussion about it. Because at one point in time, when the Senate President Pro Tem and Speaker of the House were at our meeting on that day afterwards, and after I got the wild ones calmed down, made them mad at me, then I went after these guys. And I asked this question, particularly of our Senate President Pro Tem. I said, sir, is there no place you're willing to draw a line in the sand to the ever-continuing mandates and controls and consumption of our private property coming from the federal government? Is there no place you're willing to draw a line in the sand and stand up to the federal government and say no more? If there's no place you're willing to draw that line in the sand, then get down on your knees and just stick your head out and expose your little neck for the thug boot of the federal government, because that's exactly where we're heading. And I don't know about you folks, I want to do everything I can in the political arena to fight for liberty, liberty with responsibility, but fight for liberty and fight to be able to keep as much of my own productivity as I possibly can. I recognize there are proper functions of government for which we must pay taxes. But I'm not interested in living under total tyranny. I wasn't built that way. That's not the heritage of this nation. And let me say this. Back in 1776, there were 56 men that signed a document called the Declaration of Independence. Those men that signed that were not agrarian reformers. They were not rabble-rousers. They were not Marxist socialists. They were not the downtrodden and the poor of this nation. You know what they were? They were the most powerful, wealthy, respected people in this nation. And when they signed that document and pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, you know, they didn't really have anything to gain financially. As a matter of fact, most of them lost their fortunes. A few of them lost their lives. The lives of their wives and their children. They had nothing to gain financially. But what they were signing that document for, and knowing they would be public enemy number one of the King of England once their name was on that document, was a fight for liberty. That is the same spirit that we need in the people today, to be willing to stand up for what is right and to resist that which is wrong. I am here as an alarmist. Okay? What is an alarm? It's something to wake people up, is it not? I'm not here as an alarm clock tonight to urge you to go out and act irresponsibly, but I'm here to urge you to wake up and understand the times in which we live, and to understand how serious and how sober the situation is. I'm not interested in being ruled by a majority on the two left coasts. I think there's things that we can do politically and try to recoup this nation. But if at some time it just cannot be done, I'm willing to look at secession.
Amen.
or divorce or whatever. And everybody will throw it up as the Civil War. It doesn't have to be that way. As a matter of fact, had Mitt Romney won, you'd have found a lot of people on the left that would be willing to talk about secession. Maybe that's the time to actually work for it. I don't know. Any questions tonight, folks? Yes, sir.
Every time we have one of these get-togethers, we talk about, we need to talk to the other folks on the other side of the fence about how they need to change over to our side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
But you stop and think about it, the majority, well, not the majority, but a great number of those people are getting paid off to vote the way they're doing.
Yep.
So I have a problem trying to understand what I'm supposed to say to these people
Yep.
to take the place of the pay they're getting in whichever kind of way they're getting it.
Good point. And you know, the election really wasn't about women didn't vote for us, minorities didn't vote for us, Hispanics didn't vote for us. That single women don't vote for Republicans. That's nothing new. That just doesn't happen. The election really and truly was about message. And it's difficult. What is our message? Personal responsibility. Take care of your own self. What is the message of the other side? Free ice cream from Santa Claus, 365 days a year. Do you see the importance of the Christianity aspect here? If we had time, we don't. I could show you where all redistribution of wealth for social benefits is actually a violation of the 8th commandment. Thou shalt not steal. And if you read the book, The Law, or the Davy Crockett story, Not Yours to Give, it'll probably make the case better than I can. That's why it's a moral issue. And so it's difficult. And that's why I say those states that are gone, gone. We need to build a bigger and stronger coalition in this state here to think about states' rights, is what our objective here is. You know, if we were to divide this group of people up into 3 sections tonight, and I said, how many of you would like to secede from the Union right now? A portion of you would be there. And if I said, how many of you don't want to secede from the Union right now? A portion of you would be here. And if I said, how many of you hadn't given a thought, you don't care? The larger portion of you would be in the middle. When our founding fathers signed the Declaration of Independence, maybe 25% wanted liberty from England. 25%, known as the Tories, were absolutely opposed to it. And the rest, they were just like the people in America today that can tell you who the last winner on Dancing with the Harlots was, or you know, what's the other one? I don't know. You know, The Bachelor or whatever. They can name all of those things. They can name the vice president. Oh my God, to think of their state U.S. senator, U.S. representative would no more have a clue who that was than a man in the moon. So human nature doesn't change. Yes, ma'am.
Would you address just a little bit about Agenda 21? That's something that's very, very prevalent in Oklahoma City as Plan OKC.
Yes,
and
yes.
you can see it every day through our neighborhood alliance, our mayor, and everywhere. And it's so strong.
Yes.
And is there a bill that's in the House, a
Yes,
Senate bill?
there is.
Is it in now that
Yes,
we
it
need to
is.
call our legislators?
Yes, it is.
It is.
And let me say this, and I haven't had time to talk with Mallory. I got a call about 5 or 6 weeks ago from some leaders of 3 different Tea Parties in the state of Oklahoma, and one of them had taken the responsibility to call me, Scott Pruitt, Paul Blair, Dan Fisher, and Sally Kern. And they said, could we have a meeting with you? We need direction. We need to know what to do. A lot of the Tea Parties that still exist, your major city ones really don't. But in your smaller places, the Tea Parties have kind of taken on the aspect not of an event or a gathering, but the aspect of an organization. And you're doing something. And you have, all of you have a unique flavor to you, what you're doing. And I think city elections is a big part of this Tea Party here. Understanding Agenda 21 and fighting Agenda 21. But anyway, they asked if we'd meet with them and give them some direction. And I said, oh gosh, man, you're talking some busy people, and getting those people together to formulate some direction will be difficult. We finally got that done yesterday. And so one of the things that we are going to do, and this is an invitation to you now, we're going to have a Tea Party and Conservative Organization Summit. And we're going to have it a week from Saturday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And this is for leaders of Tea Party. This is not just the general members, but we'd urge all the Tea Parties to get 2 or 3 of your leaders and to come to this meeting. And we're going to try to give some direction, both for federal government and state government and things like this. And here's the problem. Tea Parties are all over the state, but they're generally small enough that they can't accomplish anything on their own. But if somehow we could get the leaders 4, 5, maybe 6 different issues, and they agreed with those issues, and then all the Tea Parties would work on those issues when they're relevant out there, you could make a huge difference in state government. And so Agenda 21 is one of the 6 issues. The state of Alabama passed a law last year, basically it was an anti-Agenda 21 law. We have 2 or 3 lawmakers carrying legislation similar to that this year. We had an interim study on it, but it wasn't titled Agenda 21. It was called Private Property Rights. It wasn't well attended, but we have a lot of good legislation to push back. And folks, a lot of what goes in our federal government is actually a result of interfacing with the United Nations. Much of what's going on in our schools are a result of the UN organization called UNESCO. And when Ronald Reagan was president, we got out of UNESCO. And when George Bush was president, we got back into it. George W.
Let's get out of it again.
I agree with you, no doubt. But I'm just saying, when UNESCO was originally created, probably in 1949 or 50, it began to immediately interface with the education establishment in this country, and it's driving a lot of what's going on in education toward globalism.
Agenda 21.
Agenda 21, that's just part of it. So, kind of out here, if we don't ever want to take away from the autonomy of the Tea Parties, because you know, this is your organization here. But if we could get the leaders together and come up with 5 or 6 or 7 issues, and then they have a communications director where they're reaching out to you, the members of the Tea Party, and you build your Tea Party, then we can start affecting Congress, and we can start affecting the state legislature. Is Tom Cole the U.S. representative for most of you in here? Who is not under Tom Cole here? Okay. Tom Cole doesn't like me and I don't like him. Okay? We just established that, all right? He was speaking in Purcell here about 3 years ago, and I was busy, but I took the time to go. And I'm in there, and I walk in a little bit late, and I sit down on the right where Jess is sitting, and the first thing he does when he sees me, he says, "Oh, hi, Charlie, how you doing?" He's rather loquacious, if you didn't know. And we get to Q&A, and finally he recognizes me, and I get up, and I really didn't word it right. Let me tell you how I did it to my congressman, Frank Lucas. I said, "Frank, before I ask you a question, I'd like to ask everyone in here two quick questions. It's only take me a minute." I said, "How many of you in here would like to see your taxes raised to send $50 billion to Africa to fight AIDS?" You know, not a hand in the room went up. I said, "How many of you in here would like to see the federal government borrow $50 billion to send to Africa to fight AIDS?" Not a single hand went up. It didn't take me long. I turned around to Frank and I asked a similar question to Tom. I said, "Then why did you vote to send $50 billion to fight AIDS?" Is that fiscal prudence, folks? Not at all. Not in the least. Don't be hoodwinked by these guys. Watch them. Pay close attention to them. David Bourne used to be famous when he was a U.S. Senator. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 high-profile issues he would vote conservative on, and then stab the conservative voters of the state of Oklahoma in the back on everything else. And people thought he was a conservative. So, I don't want to go into Agenda 21 because I know you've had programs here, but we're fighting it. We're willing to fight it. And you know, you talk about control. It's about control over people's lives. We actually have an organization in Oklahoma City that's fighting Planning Oklahoma City, whatever.
Plan OKC.
Yeah, Plan OKC.